Okay, this is the third lesson, but it's part two's part two. Right, so overall lessons, this is the third lesson, and this is the second lesson for part two. Hello, this is Jason, or you could call me Gwaine. Gwaine is my writing name, Jason is my given name. All right, today we're going to talk about senses. What did we talk about last time? How many interrogatives are there? And what are your interrogatives? All right, if you remember, there are actually 7 interrogatives, but we don't worry about which for IELTS. So as far as IELTS is concerned, we've got 6. Who, what, where, why, when, and how. Remember, they deal with people for who. For this, we say what is object, where is place, why is reason, when is time, and to keep it simple, we say that how is manner. Remember, think object and manner for IELTS. Remember to make sure you have your interrogatives memorized. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Be able to do it in 1 second, really quickly. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Okay, today we're going to talk about senses. What are senses? A little hint for you. Senses are how we perceive the world. How many senses do we have to help us perceive the world? So remember, senses help us perceive and understand the world around us. We have sight, hearing, smell, taste, and tactile. So we have 5 senses. Our foundations are the interrogatives. We have 6. Then we go to senses. We've got 5. Okay, so these numbers may not be exact. I heard this years ago, and it might not be exact, but roughly the way we perceive the world, sight is 80% of it. So that's most of it. Then our hearing is maybe 15 to 17% of it. Of course, the blind person, it would be a lot more. They wouldn't have sight to perceive the world. So hearing would be much, much higher percentage. And then taste, smell, and tactile are really only 3 to 5% of the world. I'm sorry, 3 to 5% of how we perceive the world. So they're pretty small. So mostly it's sight. We rely on our sight a great deal. Therefore, we end up talking about sight a lot more than the others. So how can we describe sight? Right? So most of how we perceive the world is through sight, right? We just said earlier maybe 80%. Most people will use what they see to describe things to others, right? When you're attempting to describe something to someone else, normally you use what you see almost all the time. This is good, but it's also the most common, right? For a great IELTS score, it's good to use your other senses, right? Using your other senses allows the interviewer to know that you have a better command of the language. So don't just stick with what you see. Describe what you hear, what you smell, what you tasted, right? So because we rely on our sight so much, of course, we have thousands of words we can use to describe what we see. We could look at color, red, green, blue, black, silver, etc., right? Look at size. Some simple ones, big, small, or tiny, huge, long, short, narrow, wide. We could look at age. Say something's old, or something's new, or if it's living, usually we say young instead of new, right? Something ancient, which is very old, or we could actually say how old something is, right? He was an 11-year-old boy. We could talk about location, right? These are some of our prepositions. It's near, right? The lake is near my house. The store is next to my house, right? The office is across from the school. And some other descriptive adjectives. These are more maybe sometimes our opinions or what we believe things look like beautiful, ugly, messy, dirty, clean, organized, etc. So lots of sight words, lots of words we could use to describe what we see, what something looks like, how we perceive it with our sight. Can you think of any more sight words? So I put a few words on here. Might be a good idea for you to learn what they mean. We're not going to talk about all of them in great detail. Let's just look at a few. We have bleary, blurred, brilliant, colorless, dazzling, dim, dingy, faded, faint, flashy, gaudy, gleaming, glistening, glittering, gloomy, glossy, glowing, grimy, hazy, indistinct, misty, radiant, shadowy, shimmering, shiny, smudged, sparkling, streaked, striped, tarnished, twinkling. We have a lot for shiny, right? Glistening, glittering, gleaming, shimmering, sparkling, twinkling. Yeah, I just realized there's a lot for shiny there. But there's many, many more. Of course, there's thousands of words we could use. I recommend, if you have a lot of time to prepare, to increase your vocabulary for sight. And of course, not just for sight, but for some of the other sensory words we're going to be talking about. How can we describe what we hear? So we discussed earlier, right, 15 to 17% maybe of how we perceive the world is through our hearing. So if we're not using sight, often we'll be using words to describe what we have heard or what we are hearing. Um, when we think of sound, we could often think of volume, right? Maybe the degree or the manner, right? The manner in which we hear something. It was a very loud sound or a very quiet sound. It was barely perceptible, meaning we could hardly hear it. So a lot of it is manner, but not all, because we can use these other words to describe sound. What are some other ways to describe sound? As I did with sight and I will do with the other senses, I have some words here that might help you out a little. Bellow, blare, buzz, cackle, cheer, clamor, clang, crackle, creak, grumble, gurgle, hiss, howl, hush, jabber, mumble, murmur, mutter, rant, rave, roar, rumble, rustle, screech, shriek, shrill, sizzle, snarl, quack, squeal, squish, thud, thump, whimper, yelp. You don't need to know all of these. There are these and, of course, many more. Again, You can try to freshen up on your vocabulary for words we can use to describe what something sounds like. You don't need to use all of these. I don't often use all of these when talking, but some of them are definitely helpful. Okay, can you think of words that we could use to describe taste? So the next thing we want to talk about are tastes. Keep in mind you won't always be able to answer for taste. Uh, Only if you're eating something. I mean, sometimes you can. We'll talk about that a little bit. But in general, usually if you're not talking about eating something, then you can't really describe taste. Sometimes it just isn't necessary. Of course, when describing a food, you should always talk about taste. That shows you have a good understanding of English, a good vocabulary. You could also throw it into a story we'll talk about next lesson, telling a little story. Okay, but if you're asked to talk about an object other than food, it's maybe not a good idea, but you can. Well, anything you've tasted, or maybe even on accident. Sometimes the air is so bad you could taste it. All right, what are your four basic tastes? The four basic tastes that your mouth can perceive are sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. Scientists say there's different parts of the tongue that taste these different tastes. So these are our very basic tastes. A lot of people also like the word spicy, right, to describe something that tastes very, very hot. So often people might say that spicy is the fifth taste. Um, but there's many other ways we can describe taste, right? You can say, often we can make adjectives from nouns, right? If something tastes like cheese, you can say that it tastes cheesy. We can also say that if something tastes like something else, it is more common, right? So if you like to eat snake, not many people eat snake. So you could say snake tastes like chicken because many people know what chicken tastes like. So you could always say it tastes like this. I tried this new strange berry. It tastes like strawberries, right? So you could always say something tastes like something else. And we could also discuss the degree at which we enjoy the taste. Something that is delicious, maybe something tastes horrible or disgusting. We could say how we enjoy the taste or we don't enjoy the taste. And while we're on that subject, what is the difference between delicious and tasty? And I have another little question for you. What is a word we can use to describe something with a weak taste? Okay, so talking about delicious and tasty, delicious means extremely good or great. Tasty just means good. It tastes good. You like it. So a lot of times I've noticed I've been teaching ESL in China for almost 10 years. I'll have students that describe everything they like as delicious, which isn't exactly the way you're supposed to use delicious, right? Delicious means something exceptionally good, something very great. If you just like something, then maybe it's only tasty, right? We have another one, yummy, which often we don't use too much. That's mostly children use yummy. So maybe your top two or three favorite foods are delicious, right? I might say, yes, pizza is delicious, hamburgers are tasty, right? So I noticed a lot of students overuse the word delicious to describe it for anything that they might even like a little bit. Bland is used to describe something without a strong taste. If you just have bread by itself, or maybe just rice with nothing else, it's kind of a bland taste. It's not very strong. Another one that you'll see in the list below, I believe, is tasteless, which means it has no taste. Technically, water is the only thing that has no taste. But sometimes people will use the word tasteless when they really mean bland. They just mean it doesn't have a strong taste. But I recommend using bland if you want to describe something that doesn't have a strong taste. Then we have some more words we could use to describe taste: appetizing, creamy, delectable, flavorful, flavorless, gingery, luscious, nauseating, palatable, peppery, refreshing, ripe, rotten, savory, which basically means something that tastes good, isn't sweet, so usually salty, scrumptious, sharp, spoiled, stale, sugary, tangy, tasteless, as I described earlier, unappetizing, unripe, vinegary, yummy, as I mentioned earlier, and zesty. There are others. You're welcome to look them up, although I think this is probably fine for taste, just as long as you could use some of these words. The ones you really might want to look up many more for would be sight and hearing. All right, what are some ways we can describe smell? Your taste and smell perceptions are often very closely related, right? Especially when you experience both of them together, as in something you're eating. Often some of the same words can be used to describe them both. That smells delicious or disgusting, or that tastes delicious or disgusting. But there are also some smells that don't have anything to do with taste. Some scientists say you can only experience the basic tastes without the ability to smell, meaning that if you can't smell something and you taste it, you can only taste the salty, sweet, sour, or bitter taste of something. Okay, what are the differences between an odor, an aroma, and a fragrance? Okay, very simply, an odor is a bad smell, a fragrance is a good smell, usually not for food, and an aroma is a good smell, usually for food. Actually, always for food, right? Another word for odor can be stench, something that smells bad. An odor is a bad smell. The odor coming from the toilet was very bad, right? An aroma is a good smell used to describe food, something that you want to eat, maybe makes you hungry, right? The aroma from the kitchen smells good. And a fragrance is another good smell, but we don't associate that with something we're eating, right? Like, uh, I smelt her perfume was a wonderful fragrance, or the flower was a wonderful fragrance. Right? So odor, bad smell; aroma, good food smell; and fragrance is a good non-food smell. Some other words we have to describe uh, smell might be acrid, aromatic, fetid, foul smelling, fragrant, moldy, musty, odoriferous, odorless, perfumed, pungent, putrid, rancid, rank, reeking. Those four words are all very similar. Scented, waft, whiff. And also remember, many tastes can also be used to describe smell. Maybe not the basic taste. It's hard to say something smells sweet, but you can say something smells sugary. And what are some ways to describe tactile sensations? Often, instead of tactile, some people might say feeling, right? I think tactile is a better way to describe it so as not to confuse it with emotions, right? How you feel. So for this, we'll be using tactile. But in the future, you might hear someone talk about feeling when they mean tactile instead of emotions. And we are going to be talking about emotions in the next lesson. You could also say touch, right? Is another way to describe it. But again, touch can be confused with emotion, where tactile cannot. Tactile almost means the opposite of emotion. Some simple tactile observations would be, right, something is soft or it's hard, something is smooth or it's rough, or something is hot or it's cold. But those are some simple ways. We have other ways to describe tactile sensations. What are they? So some more words we have here are balmy, biting, bristly, bumpy, chilly, coarse, cool, crawly, creepy, cuddly, dusty, feathery, feverish, fluffy, furry, fuzzy, gooey, greasy, gritty, hairy, icy, limp, lumpy, moist, oily, powdery, prickly, scratchy, shivery, silky, slimy, slippery, spongy, springy, squashy, sticky, sweaty, and velvety. Again, there could be a lot more for this. And once again, if you have time, it doesn't hurt to look these words up or come up with some other ones to describe how something tactily feels. Okay, as in with the last time, the last lesson, we're going to apply these to a part two question. Um, so, are you ready? So remember, the foundation for what we're building here with an answer is going to be your interrogatives. These are important. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Right? We think of these and then we build on them. We use the senses and later emotions to expand on the foundations of our interrogatives, right? So if you think of it as building a house, right, the foundation, the bottom part, is going to be your interrogatives. So you think of your interrogatives first, then you use your sensory perception to expand on those. So, just as examples for today, we're going to be thinking about hometown again. So, we want to think of interrogatives about the hometown, and then we'll build on those interrogatives about the hometown. We will later go through a lesson where we do a new question to think of all these things. But just as examples today, we're thinking about our hometown. So take a couple seconds, think of a who in your hometown. Think of a who. Okay, so thinking of a who, we think in our hometown, let's say my mom. So sight, right? Sight for my mom. She is older but looks young, or she is middle aged. She has long black hair or short gray hair. She is tall or short, pretty or plain. She wears bright or neutral clothes, right? Those would be describing the colors. Hearing, she has a high, squeaky voice, or she cries, shouts, laughs a lot. Taste, remember I said we can't always use taste. So I have NA here. That means not applicable. You can't taste your mom. Or if you did, that would be very weird, right? Smell. My mother always wears a sweet fragrance, right? Tactile. Her hands are silky and smooth. Really describe anything about her using your senses. All right, we're going to put all we learned together to be able to describe your hometown. I'm recommending you should really pause this lesson for a while, right? Be able to come up with many things. Take some notes. Have a pen and paper. Ask yourself the interrogatives quickly, quickly, quickly. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Then use your senses to describe things about your hometown. When you're ready, watch the rest of this lesson and see what else you could have come up with. So basically, take a few minutes and think about how to answer your hometown using your interrogatives, building on those, and using your senses. Okay, let's look at sight, right? We've done all these a little bit with your mom answering for who, but we're just looking at your hometown in general. Sight. My brother was always small for his age, right? We're describing what we see, but he's cute with short black hair and a handsome appearance, right? All these words describing sight. The buildings are old and gray or shiny and new. They are dirty and crumbling apart with large black stains, or they are clean and tall, reaching up to the sky. I live in the countryside. Everything is green and beautiful. The tree is old and tall, or young and small. I live near a lake that is crystal clear, or maybe the lake is brown and muddy. My house is big and has 2 stories with 5 bedrooms, or my house is small and comfortable. Right? Many different things when you think of in your hometown to describe sight. Again, in a later lesson, we'll look at a more uh, modern question for this. Let's look at hearing. My city is busy and bustling. You can hear the noises of traffic and construction constantly. Or my town is out in the countryside and is quiet, save for the sounds of birds chirping and the stream gurgling in the distance. At night it is silent. My mother has a very high-pitched, squeaky voice. My father has a low, deep voice. The restaurant is always alive with sounds, clattering of dishes, clanking of cookware, loud with the sounds of people speaking. Okay, let's look at taste. Now remember earlier, normally we think of taste, we think of food we eat. But here's an example of taste where we're not actually eating something. The air is so thick with smog that you can actually taste it, a thick, acrid sensation, right? So sometimes you can taste things that aren't food. Maybe something accidentally gets in your mouth. My mother's cooking is delicious. When she prepares the meat, it tastes like chicken, so savory and flavorful. The restaurant near my house has very bad food. The desserts are always bitter, and the food has a stale and spoiled taste to it. Or the bakery makes wonderful and delectable treats, so sugary and sweet. Okay, let's look at smell. In the spring, you can smell the flowers blooming. The fragrance is sweet and strong. My city has the typical smells of an urban area. The chemical odors of foul-smelling exhaust and factory smog permeate the air. The aroma of my favorite restaurant is overwhelming as you walk by it. The savory and delicious smell of fried meat always makes me hungry. My mother's perfume always reminds me of my childhood. The sweet and flowery scent is comfortable. Let's look at tactile, right? The winters are so cold in my hometown. The air is always freezing, and the wind feels like it's biting my skin. My bed at my parents' house is so soft and warm. The fluffy pillows and cuddly blankets always make me glad to be home. The bark of the tree is rough and abrasive, but the leaves are smooth. The lake near my home is slimy, and every time I walk into it, there's a gooey sensation on my feet. Okay, those are just a few examples. I want you to come up with many more. Think of different ways to describe your hometown using interrogatives and then senses, and then after next lesson, should be able to use some emotions. You can combine them too. You don't need to talk about one sensation at a time, right? Here's an example. The lake near my house is brown and polluted with trash floating around on the surface. There's a putrid, rotting stench that comes from it, and you could hear a slurping sound every time you step into cold, slimy water. All right. All right, so you don't just have to, I mean, this will come with time and practice. Don't just think, okay, sight, 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 talk about sight, then hearing, 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 talk about hearing. Throw them all together. Keep in mind you will only have 1 minute when preparing for part 2. So, what did you learn in this lesson? Okay, so remember to use your interrogatives as a foundation before you start using your senses to describe things. Try to study some more vocabulary to better express your sensory perceptions. Use sensory words to embellish what you've already stated with your interrogatives. And remember, using words to describe sight is fine, it's good, but use your other senses to show more fluency in the English language, right? Remember, everyone uses sight. So it's better, it shows a deeper understanding of the language if you talk about taste and smell and your tactile sensation. Okay, guys, some homework. Review your interrogatives again. Now, this should have been homework for the last lesson. Review them, be able to spit them out quickly. Who, what, where, why, when, how, without even thinking about it. Because you will only have 1 minute to prepare. These need to be in your brain. You can't spend 20 or 30 seconds remembering your interrogatives. They need to be second nature to you. And look up some more vocabulary words to better describe what you experience with your senses. I gave you a lot. If you're not familiar with some of them, look them up. Come up with some more. There are thousands of words you can use to describe how you are experiencing the world, how you are seeing the world. And memorize your 5 senses and be able to say them as quickly as your interrogatives, right? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, tactile. Be able to do them quickly. These need to be second nature, like with your interrogatives, because you're not going to have a lot of time to prepare. And continue to study the language as well. Besides preparing for IELTS, make sure you're practicing your English, you're studying your English, you're learning more, you're being better able to speak in this language. Okay, next time we're going to look at emotions and a little quick story. We're still looking at part 2. All right. So we've covered interrogatives, we've covered our sensory perceptions, and next time we're going to talk about emotions and a quick story. So if you want, start thinking about emotions a bit before the next class. The example we're still going to use is hometown, but we will get to some more current questions to talk in a later lesson about how to actually answer it using these strategies. Okay, guys, study, 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 practice. Good luck, and thank you. I will see you next time.